idea of what we're doing in the guide, I guess. We wrote up a little thing today. So we'll start out with why would you play Frost this expansion, and I guess that kind of links into Unholy versus Frost, which we'll talk about later on as well. So the big changes, what do we have that's the same? I guess we'll start with that. We'll start with what are the similarities, and the big thing there is you still have Delirium, you still have Heartstop, you still have Chill Streak. They're all still pretty good. They still bring pretty unique stuff with those. The only problem is the game pace is way faster. We also have Baseline Zone, although that's not as interesting at 20%. But the big change comes through leveling. We get ranked to Obliterate, which makes Obliterate a bit harder than at level 50. And we get the more important and most important part. Actually, there's two parts, but the most important part, in my opinion, is Killing Machine rank 2, which actually makes your Killing Machine crit. So your Killing Machine turn your Obliterate into Frost damage when it crits through that, and that's pretty strong. The other part is that we get 2-hand Frost back. We didn't have 2-hand Frost the last two expansions, and it's available again. And the differentiation between dual wield and 2-hand is 30% more damage and Obliterate. So you get to pump with that. And just for you, if you have any questions and stuff as we go, you guys can type them in chat. But I will probably not get to them until the end. I'm not very used to this kind of thing. But yeah, so main difference between last expansion and this expansion is Obliterate can definitely pump, but it is kind of tied to damage. It'll get better it'll mature quite well as the expansion goes on, because you now scale with every stat, and your damage breakdown looks quite different. If we look at some games, I probably have a bunch of games here. You'll find that like in real-ish games, you'll find Obliterate ends up being your damage. If you compare this to like last expansion, you'll notice like Gushing Wounds or just even dots. Like Frost Fever was your damage, I think, for the most part, in the other patches, or maybe Chill Streak if you're playing that way. But either way, like you actually do damage with an ability, which is pretty fucking exciting. We'll beat that. Don't worry. Okay. So we have a new damage breakdown. We have 2-hand. Would you play 1-hand? I personally don't think 1-hand has too much of a place in PvP when you compare like what Obliterate does to you. It's kind of your win condition in a lot of ways. It's what you're hedging your bets against too. Like Chill Streak's great still, but Obliterate can just kill stuff. You get random Killing Machine procs. It's pretty great to have an ability that actually hurts. In PvE, I believe you play 1-hand still, so it's still very possible that ends up being the play. And obviously having 2 Rune Forges versus 1, but we'll talk about that in a bit as well. If you played at 50, again, like for people that played at 50 versus 60, at 60 you actually hit hard with Obliterate because they've ranked 2 Killing Machine. It's going to feel really different. Like level 50 Frost is not a thing. So you start to feel like a real spec. Like you get big upgrades as a Frost Death Knight relative to most specs. A lot of specs don't get fun stuff. Like even Unholy Death Knights get pretty good upgrades through their stuff. We get some really fun upgrades from leveling. So you'll notice that like really mature as well as you level. And like a basic overview of how things are going to look. We have a better breakdown going in. Our breakdown is way healthier. 1 second. So basically we have a better breakdown in terms of damage. We actually hit high with Obliterate, but the problem we have a little bit is that we're actually a lot flimsier than we were before. Death Strike got nerfed by a huge amount. It's at 20 in PvP. I'm not sure if it actually shows it here. What we'll have it at. It may not be scaled for PvP. No, it's showing it the full amount. It's 20% of damage taken or 6% minimum in PvP, which is a little more nerf than you'd hope. 30/7.5 seems much more reasonable, but anyway. For now, we're stuck with that. We get pumped pretty hard in PvP, and we rely on Covenants and things to live, and Soulbinds, and we rely on Soulbinds and Conduits to live a little bit. We'll go into talents next, which I have here somewhere. We can look at it in game too, but this is probably a better way to do it. Actually, no, we'll do it in game. In game's good. This is what I've been playing for the most part. The most important part of this comes down to Obliteration. Having tested Breath a decent amount as 2-hand at least, it's still nerfed in PvP, and it still doesn't do any damage. So I wouldn't recommend Breath anymore. Ice Cap, I just don't think Pillar of Frost is that great. And Pillar of Frost you'll also find is nerfed in PvP still. It's not the full 20%. I believe it's 12, somewhere around there. It's not the 20% anyway. It's still nerfed. That and your Runeforge is also nerfed in PvP. So Obliteration's the play, and as a result of Obliteration being the play, Murderous Efficiency is also the play, because you're gonna proc a whole bunch of killing machines. Murderous Efficiency gives you runes when you do that. That lets you proc more killing machines and so on. So Murderous Efficiency and Obliteration are both mandatory. In this first row, Cold Heart's still nerfed in PvP, and you also have to spam chains, so I wouldn't recommend Cold Heart. Talons is a possibility, especially if they fix the Runeforge. The Runeforge is currently bugged if you play Razor Ice. I think Inner Assault's just a safe choice though. It doesn't matter too much. I like to play Blinding Sleet because Blinding Sleet helps set up goes with Chill Streak, so I would recommend always playing that. But it's, again, you could easily play at least as fix, so that's an option as well. Avalanche is almost always the play when you play 2-Hand Frost. If you play Frozen Pulse, the problem you've got is that this is actually only radiating damage when you have auto attacks go off, and the problem is you're playing 2-Hand Frost, so your auto attacks aren't as frequent. So Pulse is the play potentially if you're playing one hand. I'm pretty sure it would be, but when you're playing 2-Hand, Avalanche is like flatly always the best. But on top of that, we also have some synergy as well with Abomination. If you're playing that procs 3 of them, so something to keep in mind. You can see I proc 3 rhymes with that, so it's definitely worth playing Avalanche in that respect. 45 or 40 row, it's up to you. These are all fine. I guess I wouldn't recommend Permafrost probably. Death Pact or Wraithwalk are both fine. The game's really fast, so Death Pact's actually a real heal again. Just don't do it until like big MS effects like Sharpened Blade, where you take more damage than you heal, but other than that, you're good to go. And maybe not in 2s. The level 45 part, that's the last part about talents. All 3 are good choices. So you have one choice. If you play Glacial Advance, that lets you play Razor Ice and Fallen Crusader at the same time. It's a little clunky to do, but Glacial Advance actually procs Obliteration, so it's actually possible to weave. You can, when you're playing the Obliteration build, you can either weave Frost Strike, Glacial Advance, or Howling Blast. So it's just like, instead of Howling Blasting without rhyme, you could consider using Glacial Advance to proc stuff and get a little extra damage as well as you go. Hypothermic Presence is good from a defensive standpoint. You can actually stack that with Transfusion and have extra like burst healing, and then Gathering Storm's a safe choice, especially with conduits and stuff. There's a few conduit synergies. There's also a legendary synergy you could play if you wanted to. So those are the talents. I'm just gonna give you guys as much information as I can. I'm sorry if this is like coming out to people that aren't interested in this kind of thing. It probably isn't coming out the best way, but I'll do my best to get through this quickly for you guys. PvP talents. So the 3 that I tend to play, I guess, baseline of these 3, Chill Streak in my opinion is mandatory. Any comp that I play, I'm going to play that, and I'm going to play Blinding Sleet to try and make those goes happen. I think it's the best part about Frost right now. Chill Streak hits very, very hard still, so I would strongly recommend playing Chill Streak all the time, and I'd strongly recommend playing Blinding Sleet to make that happen. It just makes it easy to do a grip go and then get a blind off with 2 targets stacked, and then try and find the stun after that, either through your own stun or through your teammate's stun. So Chill Streak's mandatory. That locks off that one always. And then I think Heartstop is pretty mandatory too. It's still 30%, so it's still the buffed version of Heartstop, which I think is pretty powerful well, actually, there's a few things to that. One of the most important parts about Heartstop again is, you may have remembered, if you guys played Frost last expansion, they actually nerfed Heartstop to not affect trinkets anymore. Heartstop affects trinkets again, so you can actually screw over people's PvP trinkets, which has a lot of synergy with Chill Streak offensively as well. So I would recommend playing these 2 almost always, which leaves 1 talent to mess with. And then that kind of depends on what you're against. Against a cleave that doesn't have mobility, maybe it's Necrotic. Against like mages and a lot of melee that you want to kite, like warriors and stuff, you want to screw over charge cooldown, I would recommend playing Delirium. And then obviously if you have to, you play Zone pretty much. But I'm more or less always keeping Chill Streak and Heartstop and then messing with the third one. Sim's also a possibility, but it's high risk, high reward, right? It should also be mentioned that a lot of the Covenant abilities that they've added, you can steal. And an example of that's Mind Games. You can actually steal Mind Games from a priest, and that's pretty powerful if you're trying to kill one, right? But yeah, so I tend to mess with this one right now. Obviously, it's also possible to play something like Delirium and Zone if you really wanted to, that kind of thing. You can mix and match, but the talents that I consider right now, I guess, are these three. I consider Necrotic Aura, I can consider Dark Sim sometimes, and I consider Dome. I haven't really considered playing other stuff. Dead of Winter I played at the very start as well, but it's still very clunky, and the longer cooldown kind of sucks. So I'd recommend something like this. What's next? Covenants. I get asked a lot about Covenants. I'm gonna play Necrolord, but there's not really a wrong choice when it comes to Covenants. Like, I think one of the big aspects of negativity, I guess, that's been based around the expansion so far. People have been very upset about the idea of making the wrong choice. I'm sure that for some classes you can make a really bad choice and just have a really bad experience with your class because of it, like not get invited to groups and stuff. With DKs, maybe people evolve that way, but really, from the testing I've done, the only choice that I don't like personally, but I've been told by other Death Knights is actually an okay choice, is Night Fae. Like, the other three, like I would be fine to play Venthyr, Necrolord, or play Kyrian, and they all have strengths and weaknesses pretty much. Night Fae is the only one to me that really didn't feel like it packed. Like, I couldn't get enough value from the Covenant consistently to make it useful. But some Death Knights have said they could, so that's the short answer on that. But my testing so far for Covenants, I think I did a week or two on Night Fae to begin with, and I didn't mind it, but then they nerfed Obliterate a bunch, and I didn't like it as much because that particular soulbind pretty much is based around the idea of cleaving your Obliterates with Death's Due. The problem is that everyone runs out of them in PvP. It's a really, really obvious animation. So as a result, not the greatest. I guess we can log on and show you the ability, but this is a character I played a ton at the start of the expansion. Or start of beta, I guess, for me. You drop Death's Due down, and when you're inside of it, any Obliterate you do reduces damage done by enemies and also increases your strength up to 8 Obliterates. And also, in addition, while you're inside of that and you're obliterating, they do like it cleaves your Obliterate onto one person. That's really good if you're weaving for, if you're trying to use obliteration, you're weaving Killing Machine Frost Strikes onto 2 people inside of a go. It's really, really powerful. The problem is you have no haste, so your go starts out and you try and Death's Due inside of that, and then you can't. There's not enough global. There's a lot of setup globals, and you've got no haste to work with it. And on top of that, you might only get 1 before they get out of it, unless people try and attack you inside of it. The value is kind of low on that one, so I haven't liked it. But there are a few interesting things with soulbinds, I suppose, to talk about. The main one's Wild Hunt Tactics, I think, that people like. And this is actually, I want to credit this to Streaming, who talked to me about this quite a bit. He liked it quite a lot. This apparently applies healing as well, so you get both benefits. Your damage targets above 75 is increased by 10%, and then if you're below 35% and you're healing, like if you're low on health and you're trying to heal, you get 10% more healing on your death strikes. And that again is not, I'm not taking credit for that. That's Streaming's testing on that one. But other than that, nothing crazy. A little bit of reduction through Face Your Foes. You could also play Naya. I think Naya is more of an unholy thing though, so that's not really much to talk about there. I would say that Naya's tools Poison is nerfed in PvP by a significant amount, so there's not really much to talk about there. I really think it's just playing Corrin if you're going to play anything. So it's a choice. It's not my choice though. We'll go over Kyrian next, I guess, and then we'll finish up with one that I actually like. How do you place it underneath you? You can place it underneath you with there are macros that'll do that for you. You can do at player if you want to. Anyway, let's go talk about Kyrian really quick. So Kyrian's basically a one soulbind tree or covenant. You only have one choice, and if that choice gets nerfed, you're screwed. Player and Prime, I guess Forge Light Prime, both of these don't really have a whole bunch of synergy for you. There's nothing interesting. And that's because Shackle the Unworthy as an ability is really not a very interesting one. It doesn't really do anything for Death Knight specifically. There's no actual fun interaction with that ability. It's just damage, and it spreads. with direct attacks. So you can cleave it onto other people, but that's in PvP not a great thing. People can dispel it and try and get rid of it. So it's a pretty minor amount of damage, and it's damage reduction, which is kind of cool, I guess. The damage reduction is okay, but other than that, not a whole bunch to it. The second part's good. That's when you summon a steward, you can get a File of Serenity, and that's a heal for 20% base, and you can increase it with actually with Pelagos. You can make it 50% if you have that. But Pelagos is basically good because of Comet Meditation. Meditation is when you use Shackle the Unworthy, it's a 1 minute cooldown, which is kind of interesting because so is Pillar of Frost. So every Pillar of Frost, you have a Shackle the Unworthy up before it, and that gives you 350 mastery, which is pretty much exactly 20% for Frost damage. So the advantage to Pelagos is every single time you do a Pillar of Frost and Chill Streak go, it's increased by 20% baseline. That's a pretty significant amount. If you can imagine a nerf to an ability by 20%, this is a buff to your frost damage during your pillar by 20%. That's what Pelagos represents. And the cost is you can preemptively use it as well. It'll spawn little orbs that let you extend it, so it should always last the entire pillar more or less. And that's a pretty powerful perk. So that's a very respectable one. Plus, Let Go of the Past is actually pretty useful as well. It's just magic reduction, and it adds tankiness. So it's a really good tree. It doesn't give you mobility, but it does give you a bunch of damage, and it gives you a little bit of tankiness as well through the tree. So I think it's good. I think it's the second best choice personally. It doesn't add a whole bunch of gameplay, but it adds damage, and that's good, and healing. So there's nothing to be faulted with that choice. It's a good choice. We'll go to Ventha next. So Ventha has more than one choice to be considered. In fact, honestly, you can kind of play all three with Ventha, but they've got different kind of pros and cons. So let's talk about the ability first with Ventha. It's basically an ability where you get 10% dodge and you do some damage around you, and you get runic power for every time it does damage to someone. It gives you a ton of runic power if there's more than one or two targets. I think it's 3 per tick. You can look at any of these games where I actually use the ability, and you can see runic power gained from it. We find like a decent length game, at least, maybe from a previous day. Let's say this one. Make sure you cast a couple times. Oh, it's a game where I die instantly. Maybe not the greatest game. This one, Soaring Mist, gets cast 1 time. So from 1 cast, how much should we get from it? Soaring Mist? It didn't. Either way, it does a lot. In this case, I guess it's not. Oh, 52. It gave me 52. It did 52 overflow in this case. So 50. It looks like it's 60 something. There's 10 overflow from the bottom, 52. So we get like a 67 overflow, or 67 runic power from this thing, from 1 cast. So pretty powerful. And it's shadow damage, which is good for Unholy. It's good consideration for Unholy. I believe, yeah, it's certainly not a bad choice in that respect. And then in terms of Soulbinds, you can play. Previously, I thought this was the best one, Soothing Shade. It doesn't spawn very often, but it's 525 mastery, so it gives you, in theory, the most burst of any of the trees. And on top of that, you also have Wasteland Propriety, even, that gives you 6% Versa whenever you use your ability. So you use Swing Mist, you get 6% Versa, and then you also have the ability to proc 525 mastery if you stand inside of a little shaded area. So highest burst, but not very consistent. That's compared to Kyrian, which is very consistent. It's exactly when you want it. The proc happens exactly when you're after it. The problem with Soothing Shade is if it procs at a bad time, I mean, most of the time you aren't able to use that mastery and make good use of it. So that's your problem with that, but it's a good tree. The one that I like the most is this one, but it is bugged. So Mistblade is really I actually think quite strong. You have a haste passive, like you can proc haste I think it's every 80 seconds, so every minute 20. No, is it? Yeah, it's every 80 seconds. You should proc it, right? I believe it's every 80 seconds that you get 20% haste. And then the best part about it, in my opinion, that's an okay part. The best part's Exacting Preparation. This particular Soulbind is actually bugged. It says 20%, but it's actually a 66% increase to your Runeforge in Arena. So only to Fallen Crusader, mind you, but it takes it from 10 to 17 in a bit. and then in PvE it takes it from 15 to 25. So that's a really powerful one. But defensively, it lacks quite a bit, I would say. One of the cool things you can do though is you can actually use, it actually has in this particular tree, this was my kind of my second pick in a way almost, because of the bug, which is kind of a bad reason to pick a soulbind, and also because you can use CC with Door of Shadows. So one of the cool things about that you could use is you could Door of Shadows on top of like let's say you're on a Shadow Priest, for example, right? Shadow Priest can always very easily fade any blind. You could Door of Shadows on top of the Shadow Priest, blind him, and then grip someone on and blind them to kind of like chain a go together. So you can CC for yourself, which is kind of nice. And on top of that, you're doing good damage. So that's your advantage to that. Draven's okay. Draven's got some reduction, but you don't have any healing from this, any good healing from this anyway. And that's my issue. One of my issues with it. It's not. I think it's the least tanky of everything. You don't have good reduction. You don't have good healing, and you don't have. You can have good damage, but yeah, you don't have good reduction. You don't have good healing. So it's a flimsier version of it. And I think DK is a flimsy, and that's your weakness. So I wouldn't recommend it. At least from PvP standpoint, it's not going to be like the end of the world, but it's just not necessarily as strong. And that kind of brings me to what I would pick, what I'm going to pick, and I'm actually very certain of that now. And that's after testing everything. I did a few days of Ventha, and I actually didn't mind it, but I did a few days of I did many days of Night Fae, and I did a lot of time on Carrion, and I arrived on Necrolord. And the really simple answer to why is because Necrolord is the only covenant that actually has abilities that matter, or an ability that matters, right? We actually have a fun ability that does something through Abomination Limb. So what Abomination Limb does is it'll just for 12 seconds, it'll do good damage, but it'll also try and grip every second. If it can, it'll grip someone every second. It can only grip each target once every 4 seconds. But it'll try and keep gripping people, and that's really powerful because it just enables you to get goes you would otherwise not get. It just is an OP ability that lets you get. People will get very frustrated by that ability when you actually, if your goes can one-shot people, and it's because of that, it'll be frustrating for people to deal with. I think it's a very understated, very strong ability. So that's what I'm going with, for that reason alone, basically. But it also has a good soul entry as well. We'll talk about that in a sec. The second ability is Fleshcraft, which is just a shield. You can use it against Rogue Mage and stuff at the start. There's a few little interactions with Soulbinds as well, but it's just a channeled shield, pretty much. And then in terms of Soulbinds themselves, all three are actually good in different situations. In PvE, this one's really strong. This is a Bonesmith. Because of this, they changed Forgeborn Reveries to have a 3% increase to your strength and armor recently. And then you get like a crit passive, and Serrated Spolders actually can do some pretty good damage in PvE as well. That's a shadow damage proc. I like that a little bit. Emini or Emini, whatever the person's name is, has a big strength increase that's consistent. It's up with that Abom Limb go, which is nice. When you actually use your Abomination Limb, you get 5% strength plus 2% up to, I mean in PvP it should only be 3 stacks. So it's 5% plus 6%, so an 11% boost at max from Abomination Limb to your strength. I personally think Plague Device is the best one for us though. It's the one I have pretty much played the entire time. And that is because, again, I think our big drawback going into Shadowlands at this point, with the Deathstrike nerf, we're weak defensively. And this tree has a Soulbind that procs 15% absorb shield every 30 seconds. So for reference, Kyrian baseline has a 3-minute cooldown on a 20% heal. It also removes poisons and bleeds and stuff for them, but in our case, I think the healing is what we need the most, and this is a shield almost as big as that on a 30-second cooldown. So if they don't nerf this, really powerful. If they do nerf this, you still have 2 other choices that are good, but you aren't all in on one, like you aren't all in on a single Soulbind choice. You have 3 good choices, 1 very good defensive one. Ultimate Form is also pretty good. It basically lets you immune CC when you're channeling Fleshcraft. You can try and, like, if you've been incoming polymorph or you're expecting a stun or whatever, you can try and like pre-channel your ability and just immune stuff. So I think it's very powerful, but on top of that, so it's good defensively. It's very, very good offensively because of how good Abomination Limb is. You pretty much, like, having played it, and when you start to actually play around Abomination Limb, you stop just using it as a button to press for damage, and you start using it as a grip. It can do some pretty fun stuff. I have a few clips as well. I actually just have 2 clips, like, showing specifically what I like about him. So this is just like a pretty basic go with just like a starting go. You have an awkward situation where you kind of have people spread out too much to like easily get a go. You can see, like, if this is my grip range here, I wouldn't be able to get a go with that. The mage is too far away, the priest is too far away. But what we can do instead, in this case, like, Chuck does stun, but you can grip. We Abomination Limb and it starts gripping stuff. It just kind of makes it pretty consistent to get a go. You just kind of wait until it's convenient, and you can make it go happen. This is actually like a few minutes into the game as well. It's not like an opener situation, but you can see the ability actually had a pretty profound impact on getting a go that was actually botched. Like, there's no way I could have gotten it without that. You can go for it in situations where targets are trying to spread out, and you can. I think the thing that I've learned with that particular ability is one of the more important things is to not grip first. In this case, we do grip first, but if you can manage to start with grips from your Abomination Limb, it'll just correct for you and make the go happen on its own. Priest can't really fade it. Mages can't really blink it. Like, you just have lots and lots of options. So I think it's pretty strong in that respect. So that's one version of it. Another version is this one. In this case, I think it's some fun stuff too. Kind of think the host would really appreciate that. So we're just going through like a frost guide really quick for the guys that are just joining in now. This is another situation where I think it's pretty similar. We just kind of use Abomination Limb to correct in this case. So you'll see it just grips everyone back in, and we stun them all, and they just get cleaved down in a big group, which is pretty fun. So that's Abomination Limb. So we're talking about like what covenant we like the most right now for those that are just joining in. And I think I had one more clip that I thought was pretty fun, if I can find it. Give me just 1 second, guys. This is one that I've only done like once or twice successfully. So this is the first time we tried this, and it actually worked out pretty well. So this is using Abomination Limb to, and this is the key here is using Abomination Limb first. So you can kind of see we're trying to move across this. We're going to try and get this shaman behind a pillar. You can see the other shaman's number 2 in the top right of your screen. So the healer is number 2 for quite a ways away. We Abomination Limb first, then we grip him. After that, we kill grounding. Then we grip him, and then Abomination Limb sort of 4-second cooldown. It's back up again, and then he gets stunned over here. And then I believe we use a ROP after this to keep him in. But yeah, I mean, the shaman hasn't even got close yet, so you can like double or triple or quadruple grip someone, which I think is pretty strong too. So just another little thing to consider with it. Okay, so we're doing Necrolid for me, at least. And I think that's the main reason why. We'll go over the legendaries next. Yeah, there's a lot of, if you actually start playing around it, it's a very, very powerful ability to play with, I think. And it's got far more like interaction in terms of your gameplay than 20% more damage, in my opinion, at least. 20% more damage may actually get wins, and you'll lose to other Death Knights playing Carrion, for example, if they get 2 good goes in a row. Like, I don't think Abomination Limb is that strong if you would get the go anyway against like Cleaves, for example. So if this is tournament play and the other team's always gonna let you get goes, and you know it, like you're confident you can get goes without it, then Abom Limb is not as strong as, at least offensively, not as strong as Carrion, where you see 20% more damage. But if you can get a go where you otherwise wouldn't, or do some sort of weird grip with it, then it's pretty strong. I'll go over legendaries next. I think I have a calculator for them, right? Yeah. Okay. So we're looking at Frost. So your powers. What do we have? I haven't really liked I don't really like the neutral ones much, you know, or much at all. So you only have 4 choices. I don't think, like, Super Strain is hugely nerfed, so I wouldn't recommend that. I have tested it, didn't like it. Pheromones, it's just awkward because you don't really want to play Death and Decay. It's a consideration for Night Fae maybe, and maybe they'll buff it a whole bunch. And you know, the chance to fair isn't very high, so you kind of have to get very lucky with that. Grip of the Everlasting is something that I tried to make work again with Night Fae. That's actually why you saw that if you saw my Night Fae character earlier on, it was actually a High Mountain Tauren Night Fae. I wanted to do what I was doing with Necrolord with Night Fae, where we would like we would try and use like High Mountain Tauren or the Blink Soul Shape from Night Fae and try and double grip people behind pillars and stuff. But you sacrifice too much, in my opinion, to do it. Death's Embrace is playable. That's the AMS one, 140% on duration, and then it heals you for the amount. The problem is that you actually break AMS in one global, so it does last for a really long time. In fact, as in Holy, you can get like 21 seconds or 23 seconds or something like that, but it breaks in one global, so I'm not entirely sure it's that useful. So of the actual Frost ones, the 2 main ones that I think are good, that you'll see people play, a Kiltura's Favor, that's 10% more burst. That could be very good, especially if you're playing Kyrian. You get the 20% mastery, and then you play Kiltura's Favor as well, and you just destroy people with 10% more. So that's good if you want big numbers. The only problem is the fact that it runs 2 runes isn't that useful, because Obliterate baseline does not do much damage. Like if you're obliterating and it's not killing machine based, it's not as substantial. Ryan, thank you for the huge host, buddy. Really appreciate that as well. So if the guys just joining now, we're just talking about some stuff to do with a Frosty K. Like we're doing a Frosty guy basically. As you can see in the top left of my screen, we had a Frosty K guide sub goal. So we're just going over talents and stuff. If you go back in the VOD a bit and you guys are interested in that kind of thing, it'll be up there. So we're looking at Frosty K legendaries right now. The one that I think I'm always pretty much playing is Absolute Zero. And that is because, again, it's the same kind of reason that I like playing Necrolord. It actually gives you an extra ability pretty much. Like if you can think of like most legendaries increase something, this takes Frostworm, reduces its cooldown by half, and then makes it stun. Like you literally get given a stun. It gives you a talent, an ability. It's also hits pretty hard. So I actually find it very hard to justify not playing Frostworm's Fury, because it, you know, in addition to the flexibility you get from Abomination Limb, you also get Frostworm's Fury to actually stun after you get people on stacked up, so you can do your own goes, which is something you really suffered. Like it's not perfect. Like you couldn't really play comps, for example, like caster comps that don't have stuns and rely on Abomination or rely on Frostworm's Fury, but it does help a ton to, like, you can mess up a go in between and then get your own go with Frostworm's Fury and stuff. Chat will not be shown in the YouTube video now. Okay. And then in terms of, we'll go back to this. I think in terms of legendaries, like we can look at the other ones too, I suppose. Fighting Cult's interesting in that you can play. It's a good AoE one, I believe. It's pretty much if you played in BFA, it's the same as the Azurite trait that you had back then, the Remorseless one. It is interesting because you have a conduit that you can play that increases your. It does kind of a similar thing. If I find it, I think it's Everfrost. Stacks with 10 times. It's 30% base at 10 stacks, and then you can get 30% more from Biting Cold, and then you can. Yeah, it's not a bad choice. It's just not. I don't think it's not as impactful as Absolute Zero or as bursty as Kultira's Favor. And then Rage the Frozen Champion. Honestly, I haven't even played. I don't know if I'd recommend it though. It's just a chance to trigger Rhyme and Howling Blast, generating 8 runic power. It's just more resources, I guess, right? It just helps you with the resources. I don't think it's that great. All right, so we have a stats next, and the stats are pretty straightforward. You pretty much just play Mastery and then Verse, or Verse and then Mastery. You play as much versatility as you need to live. You'll try and build as much Verse as you need to survive in Arena, and that may actually end up being really, really important. And then you need as much Mastery to kill people as you need to actually land a kill with your chill streak goes. So on launch, it may end up being like more of a verse game because DKs are really squishy. And then you just get as much mastery as, like, you want to have enough mastery that your goes are scary enough to kill something. That's pretty much your priority. You need to bring something to the table in terms of killing things. So as much mastery as you need, and then as much verse as you can get away with to not die. The only other interesting thing, I guess, is in terms of rune forges, what people are playing in that respect. I think I'm playing Razor Ice instead of playing Crusader, and that is because it turns out, like, you never had this choice before. You never had to make this choice before, because when you played Frost, you always played with 2 rune forges. So you just played, you had to play both. You had to play Razor Ice and Fallen Crusader. But Fallen Crusader is now up to 10% in PvP, and Razor Ice is 15% frost damage all the time in PvP. So 10% strength some of the time, or 15% more frost damage all the time. Even though, like, Razor Ice is slightly bugged with the extra the frost damage, the extra weapon damage is frost damage is bugged. The extra frost damage is not. So you're right. So you have the option to play Glacial Advance and try and have both, but you sacrifice damage through Gathering Storm or healing through Hypothermic Presence. So you could play Glacial. There's just a sacrifice in doing so. And then Glacial is also kind of awkward to weave in. It's also kind of awkward. It's if you're training something or you're against a cleave, playing Glacial is a very viable option, and playing both. It's really up to you on that one. But I think in terms of, like, simplicity and the smoothness of rotation and stuff, Razor Ice feels pretty consistently strong from what I've seen, especially if they fix the weapon damage aspect of it, because I actually think that'll actually do quite a bit. So you need to play both and play Glacial Advance, or you can play one and then play whichever one of utility you want. You play the damage to Gathering Storm, and the other thing again is you have that conduit that I think is pretty good. I believe Everfrost is a pretty strong conduit to play. So having that and then playing Gathering Storm, for example, is pretty decent. So that's the only important part. In terms of enchants and stuff, you kind of just do your own thing. I can go over those, I guess. I'm playing Eternal so much on this character with 2 mastery enchants, but yeah, I mean, your stats you're going to build around what you think you need. But I would assume, an important thing to get used to is playing low haste and low crit, because I think it's gonna be tough to play that in that first patch at this point. Oh, again, I already mentioned at the start, but if you play Glacial Advance, keep in mind that you can weave Glacial Advance to proc Obliteration. That's an important thing to keep in mind if you were thinking of playing 2 Rune Forges. It's kind of nice to, inside of your Pillar of Frost, you can just be using Glacial Advance every other global pretty much, because it costs runic power. All right, so we have 2 bits left pretty much. We have rotation and comps to go. In terms of rotation, I mean, I think the DK rotation for Frost is pretty straightforward. You don't actually have that many buttons, let's be real. But it's pretty much just a matter, like, your basic, rotation is going to be keeping runes on cooldown, using any procs that happen. So like Rhyme procs, they're gonna happen 45% of the time. Get those out of the way as fast as you can. If you get a Killing Machine proc, which is not gonna happen very much with low crit, but as soon as you get any kind of proc, get them out of the way as fast as you can. And then it's just a matter of keeping, like, Remorseless Winter on cooldown, and keeping 3 runes on cooldown while keeping your runic power below 100 with Frost Strikes. So you're just Frost Striking or Death Striking to keep your runic power under control, keep your runes under control. And with low haste, I mean, the class kind of plays itself quite a bit. So that's your basics. And then again, see, we get the Kill Machine proc. You just get all those procs out of the way. You're just kind of following around whatever lights up. It's a very straightforward spec. In terms of your go damage, in terms of what you do in terms of burst, typically, in my case, I mean, I think with A-Bomb Limb, you can do quite a few things to get a go happening. It's nice to have a precast on Remorse. You might want to start with a Bomb Limb to stack things up. You might grip. Generally speaking, you want to start your go with Blind, and then you want to pretty rapidly stun, and then throw the rest of your damage. So the rest of your damage in this case would be, like, say, Dragon if you want to stun with the Dragon, or Leg Sweep from your teammate. And then once you actually start your go, you're just going to be weaving Obliterate with, you're going to try and proc Obliterate with either, so 3 things proc Obliterate. Let me add a combat down. Through Obliteration, you proc it with Frost Strike, Howling Blast and Killing, if you're playing Glacial Advance will proc it too. So you're going to weave, every global is going to be proc Killing Machine, and then use Killing Machine on an Obliterate, and you just keep doing that over and over again. And then you have kind of a question to make, because you have a few extra globals with Chill Streak. I would recommend Pillar of Frosting as late as possible, to like get extra time with that. So if you were gonna, for example, like if you're forced to use like Dragon, for example, to stun, try and weave it afterwards. It's only 10% strength you're missing out on. So that's your burst rotation. We'll go through it. I mean, if you're doing like the go between and you're not using stuns, it's pretty straightforward. It's just Pillar, I use the Howling Blast there, Obliterate, Howling Blast again, Obliterate, Howling Blast, Obliterate. We just chain procking. It normally be Frost Striking and stuff, and it's kind of awkward to do it that way, but yeah. Because all of your damage, if you look at your actual breakdown, your normal Obliterates do nothing. Your crit Obliterates do everything. You can kind of see the difference there between a hit, 1.1k, and then a crit at 6.2, 6.9, 7.4, etc. And I didn't have this like kind of put in, but you probably want to itemize with PvP trinket. Like use a badge. I don't believe, from my testing, even when PvP trinkets were PvE trinkets were broken, I really like playing badge. So I would recommend a setup that involves a badge. It's a 1 minute cooldown now. It used to be 2 minutes. They have nerfed it a teeny bit, but it's still really powerful because you're using it with Chill Streak every time. Why crits are so much higher? So crits are really high because of Killing Machine rank 2. What Killing Machine rank 2 does is it turns your frost damage, or your Obliterate crits into frost damage, which means Mastery is contributing to them. So that's why Obliterations become so strong. All right, so the last part that I've got to cover here is comps and what I think will be good. For me personally, I think you're going to probably see the same, the usual stuff that you've seen for a few expansions now with Death Knights and Frost Death Knights. You'll probably see mostly cleaves. I think Winoka DK will be really strong. It'll be the kind of S tier Frost DK comp if one exists. If DKs are as strong as they kind of seem on beta, but then in terms of they may not end up being as strong as they are in beta. Obviously, there's not as many competitive games, but if they're good, they're probably good with Winoka DK because they have good synergy in terms of stuns. They help each other get damage off. The grip adds extra cleave and stuff, and then Necrolord obviously adds a ton of that. So I think Winoka DK is probably the best. Warrior DK TSG, from my experience so far on beta, has seemed really strong. The new carrying ability that they get through that, they put like a spear on the ground that grips everyone and over again. That's pretty strong for your goes too. DHDK, although that's not as durable, you might see some caster comps show up as well, and some other melee cleaves. I don't know, but I don't think you'd see an enhancement shaman DK, for example. But you might see like Shadow Priest Frost DK potentially. Now it could have some synergy, especially if a lot of comps become possible if Mistweavers become good. If you see any buffs at all across the expansion to Mistweaver healing, Mistweavers seem like the worst healer right now, in my opinion. But if you see any changes to Mistweavers that make them strong, just the ability to have them as a stun class pretty much turns any comp into Winoka DK. So you could then suddenly play with mages, you could play with LA Shamans, you could play with Moonkins, like everything becomes possible at that point. So it's something to look out for. But baseline, you could kind of expect to see the usual cleaves, and then maybe Shadow Priest DK, maybe LA Shaman DK, maybe Moonkin DK. I've heard good things about Moonkin DK actually. You can maybe see that, especially if Monk's good. And then the last part that I guess we talk about is less of a Frost DK question and more of like a general question on like Unholy DK versus Frost and what I think of those, because I think that's something I get asked a lot. And the short answer to that is I think Unholy is lacking in a few ways right now. They kind of started out trying to change Unholy to not be like as restricted by GC, like having dead globals that don't do damage, and just to like set up globals. They have a lot of those. They had a lot of those. They used to have Unholy Frenzy, and they used to have like they would Outbreak, Unholy Frenzy, Dark Transformation, and they'd do nothing. I guess Abomination and PvP as well, right? They're all just dead globals. They were just set up globals. And in a game with low haste, they feel pretty bad to use that way. So they started to fix those. They only fixed one of them. They only fixed Unholy Frenzy and made it into like a Festering Strike too. So I kind of didn't test as much Unholy as I could have, because I kind of always figured they were going to make that change. They had an interesting change they were going to make, and they didn't end up making it. So Unholy seems incomplete rotationally, and it feels incomplete in terms of like, I mean, Necrotic Strike doesn't do good damage right now. You don't play Necrotic Strike, so it doesn't feel like a spec that's been finished yet to me. And I guess there's just a lot of things going on, so they probably, you know, obviously with only 2 days left, or less than 1 day even at this point, they're not going to fix it. So we'll see what happens on release with that. They will eventually make a change to Necrotic Strike at the very least, I'm assuming, and that will make it viable and probably pretty good. In PvE, I'm fairly sure that Unholy is better, like all around. So it's certainly possible that the spec does really well with like scaling on conduits and stuff. But from my testing so far, Frost pretty consistently pulls ahead, both in terms of survival because it has interesting auto talents and stuff. I guess you get bigger lit shields as Unholy, but in general, I think that Frost feels like the more solid, safe choice. Unholy with haste probably does very well. So last part, that's pretty much all I had to cover. That probably took like 40 minutes. I swear that took like 40 minutes. So I'm sorry it took so long. But the last part we'd talk about is any questions anyone had. If anyone had any little questions and stuff, you'd throw them in. Unholy better in PvE? Supposedly yes. Twos. Okay, that's a very good point. Well, actually, that's a very, very good thing to lead into. In twos, Frost is significantly more viable than it was before, but it's not better than Unholy even like now. Me personally, I'm going to play Unholy in twos. I'll play Frost in threes. Frost will feel better in twos, and it actually can kill stuff with just like that. The fact of the matter is, if you played Frost before, you couldn't do this. You couldn't just go up to someone and start attacking them and do really good damage with just obliterates. That's a really powerful aspect to have that we just didn't have before. So just being able to go up and actually have buttons do damage and kill someone, that is something we haven't had. And I guess we had that in Legion a little bit, but yeah, it's even stronger now, I think. So I will play it a little bit in twos, but I think Unholy still makes more sense. Would Hunter DK work? Potentially. I don't know how, I'm not sure how fragile Hunters are. I also don't think Hunters bring, like, they're very reliant on CC as well. So you'd have to have a healer that makes that work. Maybe like Hodge Trap and stuff. Like, Marks Hunters are in general very strong. I just don't know if they're, you know, comparing a Death Knight to, like, say, a Sub-Rogue. I don't know if we bring more than a Sub-Rogue would bring, or anywhere near what a Sub-Rogue would bring. And I don't think we bring appreciably that much more damage either. We used to have big damage advantages that we brought, right? Like PH used to have overwhelming pressure because, you know, DKs were the highest damage melee class and stuff. I kind of feel like things like Windwalker Monk, Warrior, and Rogue all seem like better choices than Death Knights right now, sadly. There are still some really fun things you can do with Death Knight. You can grip into traps. You could I guess you play Asphyxiate as Frost, so you can have a heal that sets up traps and stuff. But yeah,